Red and blue lights spun in my driveway as a woman in a fake badge screamed that my car was HOA property now. "You're under arrest for violating community standards," she shrieked, waving a laminated card like it meant something. I laughed right before she reached for my car keys, and I realized this woman actually believed she could take my property. 6 months earlier, none of this insanity existed. I was just a guy named Marcus, trying to live quietly in Maple Ridge Estates. I'd bought my house with my late father's savings, a 3-bedroom ranch with a crooked oak tree I refused to cut down. My neighbor Brittany Sorensen ran the HOA board like her personal kingdom, and everyone on the street feared her clipboard. Brittany wasn't just petty, she used loopholes in the bylaws to fine, harass, and control residents who dared question her. At first, I thought she was just uptight. I had no idea how far she'd go, or how much I'd have to fight back. Maple Ridge had 32 homes, manicured lawns, and one unspoken rule: never, ever cross Brittany Sorensen. My first mistake? Planting tomatoes in my own backyard. My first warning letter arrived within 48 hours. Unapproved vegetation, it read, citing a bylaw nobody had ever enforced before. I laughed it off. That was foolish. Brittany had been HOA president for 6 years, re-elected unopposed because nobody wanted the headache of running against her. She controlled the reserve fund, the landscaping contracts, and every violation notice that left the community mailbox. My neighbor Dolores, 81 years old, once got fined $200 for a wind chime disrupting neighborhood tranquility. Nobody fought back. Fighting Brittany meant lawsuits. Yeah. And a woman who somehow always found new rules to invoke. I told myself I'd keep my head down, pay whatever fine came, and avoid her radar entirely. That plan lasted 3 weeks. The tomato fine ballooned to $500 when I failed to respond in the mandated 14-day window. I never received that first notice. It turned out mail delays always seemed to favor Brittany's enforcement timeline. I paid it anyway, swallowing my anger, because I'd heard what happened to people who pushed back against her. That should have been the end of it. Instead, it was just the opening move in a war I didn't know I'd entered. 2 weeks later, a new notice. My mailbox post was the wrong shade of white, per an amendment I'd never seen. I asked to see this amendment. Brittany said it was pending board ratification, meaning it didn't officially exist yet. I started keeping every letter, every text, every voicemail. Something told me I'd need proof eventually. My wife Elena thought I was being paranoid. "It's just an HO, Marcus. Pay the fine and move on." But I noticed a pattern. Every fine, every violation, always landed on residents who'd once questioned a board decision. Dolores had asked about the reserve fund at a meeting. 2 weeks later, wind chime fine. Coincidence? I doubted it. I decided to attend my first HOA meeting, just to observe. Brittany ran it like a courtroom where she was judge and jury. She dismissed every question with practiced condescension, smiling the whole time like she was doing us all a favor. After the meeting, she approached me directly. "I noticed your fence height, Marcus. Might want to check the bylaws." It wasn't a friendly warning. It was a threat, delivered with a smile. And I finally understood what everyone feared. My fence was 6 inches taller than allowed, installed by the previous owner, grandfathered in per public record. I brought the county permit to prove it. Brittany said grandfather clauses didn't apply retroactively under her new interpretation. That's when the fine jumped from a warning to $800, with a threat of a lien on my house. Yeah. On my house. Over 6 inches of fence that existed before I even bought the property. I called a lawyer friend, Ray, who told me HOA liens were real and could genuinely jeopardize my mortgage. "These boards have more power than people realize," Ray warned. "Don't ignore this. But don't panic either. Document everything." So I did. I started recording meetings, saving emails, and cross-referencing every bylaw Brittany cited against the actual filed document. What I found stunned me. At least 4 of her violations cited rules that had never been legally ratified. She was making up rules on the spot, banking on the fact that nobody bothered to check the actual governing documents. I requested the official, recorded HOA bylaws from the county clerk's office, a public record she couldn't hide from me. The gap between what she enforced and what was legally binding was enormous. This wasn't governance. This was a con. Still, I said nothing. I smiled at meetings, paid a few smaller fines, and quietly built my case, piece by piece. Then Brittany made a move that changed everything. She went after Dolores's house directly, threatening foreclosure over unpaid fines. Dolores, 81, on a fixed income, facing foreclosure over a wind chime and a mailbox flag Brittany deemed aggressive. That was the moment I stopped being cautious. Dolores had no lawyer, no savings for a fight. She had me. I visited her that evening. She was crying at her kitchen table, holding a foreclosure notice with shaking hands. I don't know what I did wrong, she whispered. I just wanted to fly my flag for my grandson in the Navy. Something in me snapped. Not rage, resolve. I told her, you didn't do anything wrong. And I'm going to prove it. That night, I emailed every neighbor I trusted, asking quietly, has Brittany ever threatened you? The replies flooded in by morning. 11 households. 11 stories of arbitrary fines, sudden rule changes, and thinly veiled threats about liens and foreclosure. I created a shared folder, screenshots, scanned letters, meeting recordings, and started building a timeline of Brittany's pattern. One neighbor, Tom, had recordings of Brittany admitting on the phone that a rule wasn't official yet, but enforce it anyway. That recording alone could unravel everything. An open admission she fabricated infractions to punish residents she disliked. I reached out to a real estate attorney specializing in HOA disputes, sending her the growing folder of evidence. Attorney Patricia Nguyen called me back within a day. This isn't just overreach, she said. This could be fraud and elder abuse. Elder abuse, because of what she was doing to Dolores. Those words hit harder than any fine ever could. Patricia advised something clever. Don't confront Brittany yet. Let her keep making mistakes. Every new fine was more evidence. So I played along, attending meetings, nodding, appearing compliant, while quietly recording every unlawful decision she made. Brittany, meanwhile, grew bolder, convinced no one would ever challenge her. That confidence would become her downfall. By the end of that month, I had 31 documented violations of the HOA's actual governing rules, committed by its own president. Part 2. With the foreclosure threat against Dolores looming, I knew we needed more than documents, we needed public pressure too. I started a private neighborhood group chat, careful not to tip off Brittany's few loyal informants on the block. 22 of 32 households joined within days, all sharing their own quiet horror stories about Brittany's reign. One woman, Priya, revealed Brittany had once threatened to report her home daycare to the state over unauthorized commercial use. Priya's daycare was fully licensed. Brittany simply disliked the extra cars parked near her own driveway during pickup hours. Another neighbor, Frank, showed a text where Brittany offered to waive his fine if he voted her way on a contract bid. That text was gold, evidence of quid pro quo, using enforcement power as leverage for personal and financial gain. Patricia confirmed, combined with the recorded call. We now had a real pattern of financial coercion. Not just rule enforcement. But Patricia warned me, HOA lawsuits were slow and expensive. We needed leverage that would work faster than courts. I remembered Brittany once bragging that the HOA's landscaping contract went to her brother-in-law's company. No bidding required. I pulled the HOA's public financial filings. Sure enough, Sorensen Lawn Services had billed $40,000 over 3 years. $40,000? No competing bids. Paid from the same reserve fund she'd refused to explain to Dolores. This wasn't just petty tyranny anymore. This looked like embezzlement dressed up as community landscaping decisions. I brought this to Patricia, who immediately flagged it as a potential violation of the HOA's own conflict of interest bylaws. Now we're getting somewhere, she said. This isn't a fence dispute anymore. This is fraud, Marcus. Real fraud. I felt something shift in me, from a scared homeowner to someone actually capable of taking Brittany down. We requested a formal financial audit through the HOA's own bylaws, a right every homeowner technically possessed. Brittany denied the request outright, claiming audits required board approval, a rule that, again, didn't actually exist. Her denial, in writing, became evidence number 32, obstruction of a legally mandated homeowner right to financial transparency. Meanwhile, Dolores's foreclosure clock kept ticking. We had 30 days before the lien could legally proceed to auction. Patricia filed an emergency motion to pause the foreclosure, citing procedural violations and how the fines were originally issued. A judge granted a temporary stay, our first real legal victory, and Brittany's first real crack in her armor. She showed up at Dolores's door the next day, furious, demanding to know who had gotten lawyers involved. Dolores, calm as ever, simply said, "I don't know what you're talking about, Brittany. Have a nice day." That door slam might be the most satisfying sound I've ever heard in my entire life. Karma was circling. But Brittany didn't back down. She doubled her efforts, and suddenly new fines hit almost every household in our group chat. Mine arrived within hours. Excessive vehicle violation for parking my own truck in my own driveway overnight. 12 new fines in 1 week, all targeting people she somehow suspected of organizing against her. Her paranoia was showing. Then came the twist nobody saw coming. Brittany accused me publicly, at a meeting, of harassing her via anonymous complaints. She played victim beautifully, tears and all, telling the room I was orchestrating a smear campaign against her leadership. Half the room believed her. The performance was that good. I realized then she'd done this before, to someone else. I asked around quietly and found Harold, a former board member who'd resigned 2 years earlier under mysterious circumstances. Harold agreed to meet me at a diner outside the neighborhood, clearly still nervous about discussing Brittany even now. "She destroyed my reputation," Harold said. "Made everyone think I was stealing from the reserve fund. I lost my business." Turns out, Harold had questioned the exact same landscaping contract years before I ever noticed the pattern myself. Brittany had forged a fake email trail making it look like Harold approved kickbacks to a vendor he'd never even met. Harold still had the original, unaltered emails saved, proof the fraud allegations against him had been fabricated by Brittany. This was twist number 1. Brittany wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was a repeat offender who'd ruined someone before. Harold agreed to testify, finally ready after 2 years of silence. Once he saw others were standing up too. With Harold's evidence, our case tripled in strength, a documented history of fraud, forgery, and reputation destruction. Patricia filed a formal complaint with the state's HOA Oversight Board, attaching every document we'd gathered so far. Brittany, unaware of Harold's involvement, kept escalating, convinced her intimidation tactics would silence us like before. She started showing up uninvited at residents' homes, photographing violations that existed only in her imagination. One night, she photographed my garage door, claiming the color had faded beyond acceptable HOA standards overnight. I quietly recorded her on my doorbell camera, measuring my garage door with a paint swatch and muttering to herself. The footage showed her comparing colors under flashlight, at 11 at night, clearly fabricating a violation from nothing. That video became one of our strongest pieces of evidence, undeniable proof of premeditated, bad faith enforcement. Meanwhile, Brittany's grip on the board started slipping. 2 other board members quietly reached out to me, scared. "We didn't know it was this bad," one admitted. "She controls the agenda. We just rubber stamp what she wants." Twist number 2, Brittany had been forging board meeting minutes, listing unanimous votes that never actually happened. One board member, Susan, showed me the actual minutes she'd taken, completely different from what Brittany later published. Susan had kept her handwritten notes for 2 years, never realizing how valuable they'd become until now. With forged minutes exposed, we now had proof Brittany fabricated official records, a crime, not just an ethics violation. Patricia said this elevated everything. Forging official corporate records could mean real criminal charges, not just civil penalties. We were close. But Brittany, sensing the walls closing in, made her most desperate move yet. She targeted my job. She somehow discovered where I worked and sent an anonymous complaint to my employer, accusing me of community harassment. My manager called me in, confused, holding a printed email full of vague, unfounded accusations about my character. I explained everything, the fines, the fraud, the lawsuit, and thankfully, my manager believed me completely. "This sounds insane," she said. "Do whatever you need to fight this. Your job here is completely safe." Relief washed over me, but also fury. Brittany had crossed a line. trying to destroy my livelihood over documents. Part 3. That attack on my job became the final piece Patricia needed to file for a restraining order against Brittany. A judge granted a temporary order, barring Brittany from contacting me, my employer, or engaging in retaliatory harassment. Brittany served papers in her own driveway, screamed that this was a coordinated attack on her leadership. The neighborhood group chat lit up instantly, people who'd once feared her now openly discussing her downfall. Twist number 3 arrived when Patricia discovered the HOA's insurance policy required board members carry liability coverage. Brittany had let that policy lapse 18 months ago, meaning every fraudulent decision since exposed her to personal liability. This meant she couldn't hide behind the HOA anymore. Any judgment against the board could now target her personally. Word of the restraining order spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, emboldening even the most hesitant residents. 15 more households came forward within a week, each with their own story of arbitrary fines and intimidation. We compiled everything into one master complaint: fraud, forged records, harassment, elder abuse, and financial misconduct. Patricia filed with the State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division, a step that finally felt irreversible. Brittany, cornered, tried a new tactic. She called an emergency meeting to clear the air and rally supporters. Only 6 people showed up. 6 out of 32 households. Her once untouchable authority had crumbled overnight. She stood at the podium, visibly shaking, insisting this was all a misunderstanding orchestrated by disgruntled troublemakers. I stood up calmly and asked one simple question: where did the $40,000 in landscaping fees actually go? Silence. Complete silence. She stammered something about vendor relationships, before abruptly ending the meeting early. That night, someone leaked footage of the meeting online, and it spread through local community Facebook groups within hours. Comments flooded in from other neighborhoods, people recognizing similar patterns from their own HOA experiences with power abuse. Local news picked up the story: HOA president accused of fraud, forgery, and harassment against elderly resident. A reporter reached out to me directly, and with Patricia's blessing, I agreed to share our documented evidence. The story aired that weekend, featuring Dolores's foreclosure notice alongside Brittany's forged meeting minutes. Side by side, Brittany's reputation, built on fear and control, evaporated in the span of a single news segment. Twist number 4 hit hard. Turns out Brittany had done this exact scheme at a previous HOA in another state. An investigative journalist found records of Brittany being quietly removed from a board in Ohio for financial irregularities. She'd simply moved states, changed her HOA affiliation, and started the exact same pattern all over again here. This wasn't impulsive cruelty. This was a calculated, repeatable con, one she perfected over years of practice. The State Attorney General's office officially opened an investigation into Sorensen Lawn Services and the HOA Reserve Fund. Brittany's husband, previously silent throughout all this, suddenly filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, and moved out. Twist number 5. Divorce filings revealed he'd been unaware of the lawn service kickbacks funneling into their joint account. He testified voluntarily to investigators, providing bank records showing exactly how the stolen HOA funds had been spent. Vacations, jewelry, a lake house down payment, all quietly funded by fraudulent landscaping invoices over 3 years. With her husband cooperating and Harold's forged emails confirmed, the case against Brittany became nearly impossible to defend. Still, she refused to resign, clinging to her position with a desperation that bordered on delusional denial. She held on to her HOA title even as criminal investigators started requesting formal interviews with board members. Susan and the other board member, worried about their own liability, finally voted to formally suspend Brittany's authority. For the first time in 6 years, Brittany Sorensen was not in control of a single decision in Maple Ridge. She retaliated the only way she had left, going door to door, begging neighbors to remember all the good I did. Nobody answered. Doors stayed shut. The silence was its own kind of verdict, louder than any courtroom could be. Dolores, watching from her window, finally allowed herself a small, quiet smile after months of fear and tears. But Brittany had one last card to play, and she was about to make her biggest, Most reckless mistake yet. Part 4. Desperate and cornered, Brittany showed up at my house one evening, pounding on my door, screaming for answers. "You destroyed my life," she yelled. "I built this community. I made the rules everyone follows." I calmly reminded her that most of those rules never legally existed, and recorded every word she screamed at me. She grabbed my arm, trying to snatch my phone away, before storming off toward my driveway in a blind rage. That's when she spotted my truck, the one she'd fined for excessive vehicle violations weeks earlier, and lost control entirely. "This is HOA property now. You never paid the fine. I'm impounding this myself," she screamed, pulling out a fake badge, a laminated card, printed from some online template, claiming she held Community Enforcement Officer authority. It meant absolutely nothing. "You're under arrest for violating community standards," she shouted, reaching for my keys like she actually had police power. I laughed, right before she grabbed my keys, and I realized she genuinely believed this insane bluff would work. Neighbors, hearing the commotion, poured out onto their porches, phones already recording this unbelievable spectacle in real time. I calmly stepped back and dialed actual police, explaining a woman was impersonating law enforcement to steal my vehicle. Brittany, unaware I'd called real officers, kept screaming about citizens' arrest authority while trying to open my truck door. Real patrol cars arrived within minutes, lights flashing, the same red and blue she'd been mimicking with her fake theatrics. An officer approached, and Brittany, still holding her laminated badge, tried explaining her authority as HOA president. The officer looked at the card, looked at her, and asked flatly, "Ma'am, are you impersonating a police officer right now?" Silence again. That same silence from the meeting, now replayed in front of real law enforcement and a dozen witnesses. She stammered something about community safety protocols, but the officer had already heard enough to make a decision. "Impersonating a peace officer is a criminal offense in this state. Mum, I'm going to need you to come with us." The neighbors watching erupted, not in violence, but in the kind of stunned, satisfied silence that follows justice finally landing. Handcuffs on Brittany Sorensen, in the exact driveway where she terrorized residents for 6 straight years of tyranny. As officers walked her to the car, she screamed that this was unconstitutional harassment and demanded to speak to a lawyer. "You'll get one," the officer replied calmly, "along with whatever HOA fraud charges the state's already building against you." That single sentence confirmed everything. The criminal investigation had already escalated far beyond simple community disputes. Dolores stepped onto her porch just in time to watch the patrol car pull away with Brittany inside it. She didn't cheer. She didn't gloat. She simply nodded once, like a chapter she'd feared for years had finally closed. The following morning, local news ran the story everywhere. HOA president arrested for impersonating police to seize neighbor's car. Clips of the arrest, filmed by 3 different neighbors, went viral across every regional social media platform within hours. Twist number 6 emerged during booking. Brittany had 2 prior arrests in Ohio, both quietly sealed through plea deals. One was for check fraud. The other, chillingly, was another case of impersonating an official during a prior dispute. This wasn't her first impersonation charge. It was a pattern investigators had somehow missed until our case connected the dots. Patricia used this new information to push the state attorney general toward filing full fraud and forgery charges immediately. Within a week, Brittany faced charges for impersonating an officer, forgery of official records, and financial fraud against the HOA. Her bail was set high, reflecting the flight risk investigators now recognized given her history of relocating after prior scandals. The HOA board, freed from her control, voted unanimously to permanently remove her from any future leadership position. They also voted to dismiss Sorensen Lawn Services immediately, opening bidding to actual licensed, competitive local vendors. Dolores's fines were reversed entirely, the foreclosure threat erased from record, her home finally, completely safe again. A new interim board formed within days, made up of Susan, Harold, reinstated after his name was cleared, and me. Our first act as a board, full financial transparency, published online. Available to every homeowner without a single request needed. Twist number 7 surfaced during discovery. Brittany's forged emails against Harold years ago used the exact same template as mine. She'd literally reused her fraud script, barely modifying names and dates, confident nobody would ever compare the two cases. That laziness, ironically, became the strongest evidence tying both fraud schemes directly and undeniably back to her alone. The state's case against her grew stronger by the week, prosecutors adding charge after charge as evidence kept surfacing. Her husband, now fully divorced, testified in court, describing years of manipulation, secrecy, and hidden financial accounts. Twist number 8 revealed she'd been skimming not just landscaping funds, but also the HOA's emergency reserve for years. Nearly $90,000 total, meant for storm damage and infrastructure repairs, quietly diverted into personal accounts. The community, already reeling, learned their promised storm drainage repairs had been delayed for years because of her theft. That revelation turned neighborhood anger into something closer to grief. For years wasted, trust broken, safety compromised. Still, something remarkable happened. The community grew closer, bonded by shared struggle against a woman who tried dividing them. Weekly potluck started, something Brittany had actually banned years earlier. Citing liability concerns nobody ever understood, Dolores hosted the first one, her wind chime finally hanging proudly on her porch without fear of another fine. I stood at that potluck, looking around at neighbors who'd once avoided eye contact, now laughing together over barbecue. Twist number 9 arrived quietly. Brittany's own attorney tried building a defense using the fabricated bylaws she'd created. The judge, unimpressed, pointed out those bylaws were never legally ratified, making her own defense collapse in the courtroom. She'd been so confident in her fake rules that she forgot they held zero legal weight outside her own mind. Her trial date was set for months out, but the plea negotiations began almost immediately given overwhelming evidence. Prosecutors offered a deal: plead guilty to impersonation, forgery, and fraud, or risk a much longer sentence at trial. Her lawyer recommended taking it. The evidence, from forged emails to bank records to viral arrest footage, was insurmountable. Weeks later, Brittany stood in a courtroom, this time silent, as a judge read the final terms of her sentencing. 18 months in county jail for impersonating an officer and forgery, plus 5 years probation for financial fraud. She was also ordered to pay full restitution, nearly $90,000, back to the Maple Ridge HOA Reserve Fund. A permanent injunction barred her from ever serving on any homeowners association board again, anywhere in the state. As she was led out in handcuffs for sentencing, she looked back at the gallery, searching for any sympathetic face. She found none. Not her ex-husband, not a single former neighbor, not even the 6 people who'd attended her last meeting. I felt something unexpected in that moment, not joy exactly, but a quiet, exhausted sense of relief finally settling in. Justice hadn't come easily. It came from months of documentation, sleepless nights, and neighbors trusting each other enough to speak up. Dolores hugged me outside the courthouse, tears in her eyes, thanking me for believing her when nobody else would. "You didn't just save my house," she said. "You gave this whole street its voice back. We forgot we had one." The new HOA board immediately restructured governance, adding term limits, mandatory audits, and resident oversight committees for transparency. Harold, finally vindicated after 2 years of quiet shame, agreed to serve as board treasurer, overseeing every dollar spent. The $40,000 from fraudulent landscaping contracts was recovered through civil restitution, funding real neighborhood improvements instead. New sidewalks, repaired storm drains, a small community garden where Dolores now grows tomatoes, the same tomatoes that started everything. I still keep that first violation letter, the one about my tomato plants, framed in my home office as a reminder that small, absurd injustices, left unchecked, can grow into something far larger if nobody dares to push back. My employer never doubted me once the truth came out. And honestly, my coworkers still ask about the Karen saga regularly. The neighborhood group chat still exists, though now it's filled with barbecue invites instead of fear and warning letters. Brittany, from what I've heard, is serving her sentence quietly, appealing occasionally, though every appeal has been swiftly denied. Her house went into foreclosure eventually, the same fate she'd nearly forced onto Dolores over a simple wind chime. There's a strange, quiet poetry in that ending. One I never planned but somehow feels completely deserved. Justice, I learned, rarely arrives quickly or cleanly, but with patience, evidence, and community, it eventually, undeniably arrives. And every time I see tomatoes growing in Dolores's garden now, I remember exactly why this entire fight mattered.